Shalom, everyone, and welcome to something we've not done in quite a while. We are finally going to be able to give you the content that you have wanted from us. We're going to be doing another Preparing the Way podcast here, answering one of the questions that is as old as the subject matter itself is. But before we get to that, let me bring up my co-host because he is with me this evening.
Hello.
It's been a minute since we've done a stream together, brother.
Yes, it has. But life has been pretty chaotic for the both of us lately.
It has. But no, I gotta say I'm actually thrilled to be able to do this again. And I look forward to doing more of these. I've missed this. But in maintaining tradition, who is with you in spirit tonight, sir?
Well, it is my favorite time of the year, and so Oktoberfest.
Ah, yes. For me, I'm doing the Bushmills Prohibition recipe.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yep, very good one.
I have not switched to whiskey yet. It's only 3 p.m. where I am here.
Okay, so just a little early. I mean, not too early, but a little early.
I'll be cracking a whiskey open probably after the episode. I also have a pumpkin spice coffee here.
Good
to
man.
help fuel me for this episode.
Good man.
Yeah, I'm all in the season, so.
Me too. I jumped in feet first as soon as October hit, and I've not stopped since.
Yep.
So, before we jump into the subject, I believe you have an announcement to make.
I do, and it is my distinct honor and privilege to announce to you Alternate Media's and the Preparing the Way podcast's very first official partnership sponsor. And so, the sponsor is BibLingo. I don't know if anyone has heard of BibLingo before, but I'm gonna get them up here. 1 second. Where are you at? Yeah, there we go. So this episode is brought to you by BibLingo. And for anyone who doesn't know, this is a biblical language learning app. And we've partnered with them to help you learn, anyone who wants to learn a biblical language. And it is the biblical language. So unlike other language learning apps, it's not modern Hebrew or modern Greek, although this app does have those options. It actually has 4 different kinds of Greek that you can learn and 2 different kinds of Hebrew. You can choose the biblical languages or the modern ones if you want to. And it's really good, interactive. I've been using it since they've partnered with us, and I really enjoy it. This is really good. The specific things that I like about it particularly, and you see here, it's really interactive video lessons. They pronounce everything to you. You say it back into a microphone if you have it. On days that you might not have it, there's other ways to learn. There's usually 3 different ways that you can master the languages. Really comprehensive. And for those of you like myself, I like the textbook stuff too. This is an immersive language learning app, but they do have a textbook style option. So you can go through and read the definitions and how the prefixes and suffixes and all that stuff work. You can go into the app and learn the intricacies of the language, or just do the immersive learning stuff. And my favorite thing is the Bible reader. Everything you see, it highlights for you words and stuff that you already know and shows you words that you haven't learned yet. And so it will take you to certain Bible passages that are easier for you to read based on stuff that you've already learned how to read. And so you can learn to read the biblical languages in a way that is friendly, so you don't run into a whole bunch of stuff you don't quite know yet, and get your practice in. It's a really cool, solid app. Like I said, I've been using it, and I'm in love with it, and I'm glad to announce that they've partnered with us. And so if you want 15% off any of the plans for BibLingo, just use code AM15 for 15% off any plan. They have lifetime memberships, they have annual or monthly memberships, And they even have a homeschooling option, which I'm really happy about, and it's super good. So yeah, 15% off. Use code AM15, and thank you once again to Biblingo for sponsoring today's episode. And what an honor!
Absolutely. We've kind of maintained a tradition of always doing a spooky season special, right? Where we touch on something that's relevant with it being spooky season. So tonight's subject, if you read, is horror movies, because this has been a question that I've heard disputed and debated since as early as I could remember in every different church that I've ever visited. Are they okay? Are they not okay? What are the benefits? What are the risks? It's a controversial topic.
Yeah, it's a pretty Christian specific topic, though. I would say this is like typically a conversation you hear mostly in Christian circles. Not a conversation I get a lot of in Jewish circles, in my experience, in my limited scope of experience.
I mean, to me, that would make sense. But there are a number of concerns that Christians have when it comes to horror movies. And for a lot of them, they seem kind of one-sided or really just describing one specific type of horror movie. And I think that that's important before we really dive into the contentions that are taken with them. Let's talk about the topic of horror movies just in general. A lot of people don't know that horror is an overarching genre that has multiple different subgenres, right? And they all touch on different things, and they tend to have a bit of a different purpose. Now, this is going to be a hard pill to swallow for some people, but movies are an art form, right?
Yeah.
And every artist is trying to send a message, right? Movies are not just brain rot. It's not something that's just to get you to sit on the couch and not think. Actually, there are several kinds of movies that are intended for you to actually engage thoughtfully with it as you're watching it. Now, horror definitely didn't start out that way, but it has evolved in certain of its subgenres to be something that you are actually supposed to engage intellectually with. So just some brief, just run over the different, the main overarching subgenres, right? Some of these you can blend together into their own other subgenres, but just the main overarching subgenres of horror are going to be monster horror, right? This is a pretty old style, Godzilla. A recent one would be A Quiet Place, right? It's a monster horror movie. It's a movie where the object of the horror, that the scary thing, is a monster. There is paranormal horror or supernatural horror, right? Now that's going to deal with obviously things that are paranormal and supernatural: ghosts, demons, witches, magic, things like that. There is psychological horror, right? Psychological horror is a subgenre of horror and psychological fiction with a particular focus on mental, emotional, and psychological states to frighten, disturb, or unsettle its audiences. That's that's the most direct definition of that. That would be things like The Shining is going to be one that's a very popular one that a lot of older audiences are going to be more familiar with. Silence of the Lambs, Us.
Yep.
Us by Jordan Peele was I enjoyed that one, but it's very make you think you go crazy kind of thing. There is cosmic horror, or what's called Lovecraftian horror. That is that's the larger than life threat. There is no actual object of the horror that you can point to, because it is so cosmic and grand, beyond what you yourself can actually manage. It's so far above you that it's meant to emphasize exactly how insignificant you are as a human being, right? And a classic example of that again older audiences may be familiar with are going to be Event Horizon, right? But more modern examples of that would be like Color Out of Space, which is that actually is based on a Lovecraftian tale, and it's a weird movie, right? Cosmic horror is almost always going to be weird because of the fact that it is focusing on larger than life principles. And there really aren't very many other like good examples. Maybe like Thing. There's a couple of cosmic horror is hard to do and to do correctly. There is body horror. Body horror is going to be stuff that is makes your skin crawl, makes you uncomfortable with exactly the physicality of it. Things like Human Centipede and things of that nature. Yeah. There is slasher horror, which is the classic like 90s era Friday the 13th, Scream, Terrifier, all of those where it's really just some guy going around and murdering people. And then my favorite, and I saved this for last because it is my favorite, there is elevated horror. Okay. Elevated horror is specifically intended for you to intellectually engage with the content. All right. Elevated horror is almost always an example of the director trying to make a point. He's trying to tell you something. It's either a cautionary tale or a social critique, which almost all horror can fit into those. But elevated horror, it's more deliberate. It's where the director actually hides the message that he's trying to convey, even in such things as like the colored backlighting of a scene. Right. There's a lot of thought put into every frame of the movie that's intended to lead you to this conclusion of the message that he's trying to send. And that I don't think it can really be understated exactly how beneficial that actually can be.
I just appreciate the artistic value of stuff like that usually, because it's one of those like nothing is by accident, everything's on purpose. Like it's really deliberate angles, even of the camera, and just the way it's supposed to make you perceive the character in question. Like I love those tiny little, again, that's art. That's a very artistic, like trying to convey a message in a really, really clever way. And I think that's clever to me. And it takes a lot of skill to do something like that.
Right. My favorite example of that, actually, and probably one of my favorite directors, is Robert Eggers. He's a newer director. He directed the most recent remake of Nosferatu. That was a very well done movie, and that one's not so much horror, and even he admits he was more so trying to tell like a fairy tale and make it seem like but a dark fairy tale, no less, but a fairy tale. But the message that he gets across in that one is an interesting one. Me and my dad have had multiple conversations about it, but I think like his magnum opus, right? The best thing he's ever done was the movie The Witch. Now that movie gets a lot of criticism for essentially not having a plot. And that's because it's not intended to. It's based on a lot of the folk tale from the early colonial period about witches, and back then that was a ghost story that mothers would tell their children to get them to behave, right? You better behave or the witch of the wood will get you, stuff like that. Well, that doesn't have a plot, right? There's no plot to that. But his cinematography is in such a way that like it's called The Witch, but like we don't know why. Is it about this witch that is supposedly attacking this family on a settlement? Is it referring to the girl in the family who ultimately ends up becoming a witch, or is it just about the figure of the colonial witch in general? And technically all three of those are true, right? But because we're introduced to the protagonist the way we are, she's saying her prayers and the camera's looking down at her, it really kind of that's one of those things where camera angle actually helps to convey the message. She is a Puritan. She is living in a very oppressive puritanical society. So as she's saying her prayers, she is looking up at a camera that's looking down at her the way that puritanical society would have, right? It's things like that elevated horror like really, really bring to the forefront to get you kind of on their side. And even though she's the protagonist, there are some scenes where her back is turned to the camera and it's there are things that could be potentially innocent happening in the movie, but because her back is turned to us and we can't see her facial expression, we don't really know if we can trust what's going on and that she's being honest in it. It's just things like that that really frame how we're supposed to engage with the story being told. And The Witch is just chock full of those. There's like a whole 7-hour video just breaking down every aspect of that cinematography. And also he goes into a fair bit of history. Because one thing that always stood out to me in that movie is that it's a family that's been exiled from Salem, right?
Right.
For some form of heresy. We don't know what. This fella in this 7-hour video was able to extrapolate from clues that were hidden in backstage settings, different conversations and words and phrases that were used among the cast and whatnot, that actually what it is this family were probably early Calvinists. They were early Calvinists, and so they were exiled from the Puritan community in Salem because that would have been a more extreme, less acceptable position among Puritans at that time.
So I think it's clear which one of us is the cinephile here.
for sure. But no, I mean, that's, all that to say, I appreciate elevated horror specifically because, like, it makes you think about things like this. It actually makes you kind of re-examine your own standing in your own culture that you live in today. I think particularly about this movie in particular is it really draws on the idea of a witch as a feminist folk hero, which of course I have absolutely no love for that. But it's something that is just inherent in the figure, right? Robert Eggers admits, he said, I didn't set out to make a feminist folk hero movie, but the more that you look into the subject of the history of colonial witchery, the more you realize that that's just the nature of the beast of what you're dealing with.
So I saw a witch and didn't get any of that. I'm actually on the side of the plebiscites that did not really enjoy The Witch all that well. But I remember in preparation for this episode, we were talking about some of our favorite movies, and you've convinced me to have to go and rewatch it with a better appreciation for these things. I watched it without understanding what's going on, so I just didn't like it, I guess.
To break down specifically the nature of how it's a feminist folk hero idea, which is an interesting thing in itself, because even though the witch is a feminist folk hero, it retains the status of the witch as a social villain, right? So because the idea is that the witch has no interest in anybody else in the family except for the girl who is now approaching her adulthood, right?
Okay.
That is the only, that she's got no concern for the baby at all. She's got no concern. Matter of fact, pretty terrible thing happens to the baby. She's got no concern for the family, but there's all this concern focused on this young woman who's coming about her age, and she achieves her goal by sowing discord within the family, by creating a disunity between the mother and father specifically, right? Which is the first step in destabilizing the family, and then creating animosity between mother and daughter, right, to further alienate the daughter from the family. There's this whole dynamic of trying to retain the next generation of young woman, right, and destabilize and destroy the nuclear family, which is a goal of feminism. That actually is a goal of feminism.
All right. like I said, I gotta rewatch it. But you bring up a lot of what I like about this is we're talking from an artistic point of view. But many Christians, and we've had this conversation before in the past, have a few objections to watching this kind of stuff. And in fact, you kind of brought something a little bit of that up concerning the child. No spoilers. But there's typically speaking a few objections. I've got a couple of them listed. This is by no means meant to be an exhaustive list of Christian objections, but I wanted to go over some of the bigger, more common ones. And so your first one kind of brings up the one I hear kind of the most, the content concerns objection.
Right.
Coming from Philippians 4:8, the consuming dark content and stuff like that. And not being very in keeping with biblical values, so to speak.
It's it glorifies evil, it glorifies sin, it glorifies violence, it glorifies all bad, essentially.
Right. Yeah. So with that first objection, it sounds like you kind of already have something you're going in your head. What would you say?
Well, I mean, I don't think that a portrayal of anything that's reality is glorifying it, right? If I give a portrayal of, a mother making soup, I'm not glorifying a mother making soup. It's just a portrayal of a real event that actually could happen. And this is important when it comes to like elevated horror, and particularly like the example of The Witch is that it's a period piece. It's a historical piece, right? It takes place. Maybe the story itself is fictitious. Actually, probably not. Most of the dialogue in the movie actually was pulled right out of accounts from the time period itself. So a lot of the dialogue is just actual things that people did actually say. So if it's something that happened in history, it's not glorifying it to portray it, right? Saving Private Ryan is not glorifying violence by portraying violence. Yeah. It's just portraying a real thing that actually happened.
I'm glad you brought up war movies, because typically speaking, most war movies are actually anti-war movies.
Yes. Yeah, well, and where war movies fit in, because, and I can't believe I forgot to bring this up right from the outset, but like if we're going to say that horror is bad, right? If we just take that with a grain of salt, if we say that horror is bad, like we're really going to have to sparse out in specifics what we mean, because there's a certain style of cinematography that is textbook horror, but it gets used in other genres of movie. Right. Mm-hmm. Saving Private Ryan in particular is one. There are a lot of scenes in the hectic nature of the combat that actually are filmed in a way that would be textbook of something from a slasher film. Right. Yeah. There's one of the best examples that's been pointed out to me is in the second X-Men movie. There's a scene where the school gets assaulted by the government and Wolverine is, murking everybody all over the school. And there's a particular scene where you see all these soldiers, you see Wolverine come around from the corner, gunfire goes off, dudes are screaming, and a flashlight drops by like a boot that's just laying there. And it's like, well, that's just textbook monster horror.
Yeah.
Like that's how in monster horror back in the day, you would imply that violence happened without showing the violence.
And Wolverine, I guess, is the monster in the implication here.
Right.
A nice artistic choice, by the way. I like the flavor of that.
Right.
But yeah, with this particular objection, typically speaking, the idea is, well, you're taking in and consuming dark or horrifying content, or slasher, bloody, gory, potentially sinful. And that is our objection to this particular one. Is Philippians 4:8 especially is talking about, thinking and focusing on things that are good and pure. And you can do that while also living a real life. A person in combat is going to experience a lot of those things and can still find a way to focus on the good that drives him, to survive and get home to his family. This is Philippians 4:8 is not a catch-all to, hey, you can't consume any of this stuff at all. But we would say that typically speaking, these movies aren't trying to glorify these things. There are some that do that, and I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Right. But the ones that aren't, but they are using the violence to instill the message of the fear, or that they make you feel a certain way. That's not necessarily glorifying anything. That's just making a more visceral reality feel more realistic in a way. And that's what instills the fear in you. And a good horror movie is just doing its best to make you legitimately have a sense of frighten. Like you're so immersed in the universe that you're no longer sitting in the seat. You actually feel like you're kind of part of everything there. And that's an artistic choice, but that's not a glorification choice. in my opinion, anyway.
Right.
and, and so, but yeah, I think we would agree the pure slasher, like the ones that are just glorifying violence, that's a concern. That's
It
problematic.
so the thing about that, right, and we can maybe get into this a little bit more, right, is that I said earlier, a lot of horror is going to either be a social critique or a cautionary tale. For a long time, it was mainly cautionary tale, and the slashers of like the late '80s and early '90s are mostly, and they would market themselves as cautionary tales.
Mhm.
That's why, one of the primary rules is that the people who are behaving licentiously are the ones that end up getting killed, right?
Right.
And then so you have this movie trope of what they call the final girl, right? The one girl who survives the entire event, and typically she's the one who has been the most chaste throughout the
Right.
movie.
She kept herself out of most of it.
And so the idea is that it's intended to discourage that. It's a cautionary tale about behaving that way. The problem is it actually has the opposite effect. Okay? Nobody's walking out of those movies with that understanding, but they are walking into those movies with the understanding that they're going to see some nudity, right? That's
Yeah.
the point at which it's like, okay, this is actually just glorifying that.
Yeah, and that's something we can talk about too. Movies that make a way too much use or unnecessary use of sexual content, especially, we're not talking about movies like that.
No.
We're specifically addressing horror film as a genre, as a genre in its purest form. Every movie needs to be approached individually
Yes.
and critiqued on its own merits as to whether or not it's something that you feel comfortable with consuming, or it would be correct or right or proper for a believer to consume it, knowing what it likely has in it.
Right.
So the content concerns, that's a concern for any movie, be it a war movie, a horror movie, and so, but that does not exclude the horror genre on that
Right.
merit.
That is applicable to rom-coms.
Yeah, any movie at all, even a cartoon, animated films. So another, moving on, another objection we get a lot of is the spiritual influence objection. The Ephesians 6:12 objection, because you're taking in the occult, right? You're kind of fiddling and playing around with dangerous pagan concepts. What do you say to that?
Man, this is such a this is such a uniquely Christian fear, right?
Yeah.
Which is it's fascinating to me, because for like people who say that they don't believe that magic is real, they have a lot of superstitious fears that would imply that they believe that magic is real, in some capacity, there's this mindset, this idea that like any amount of exposure to anything that is paranormal or even remotely related to the occult is opening a gateway. It's opening this invisible spiritual portal that demons can come through and start afflicting you.
If you watch the Conjuring movies, you might as well just play with a Ouija board.
Right. Yeah. It's absurd. I'm just going to come out and say it is absurd. If that is the opinion that you have, and I really don't mean to be offensive when I say it's absurd, but it is. If that's the opinion that you have, then you cannot actually, with a serious face, look me in the eye and tell me that you don't believe in magic, because that's magic.
Yeah, the idea that just being around or even seeing something like that can have some negative spiritual effect on you in a way that would open a gateway for demonic possession, that is, you are kind of admitting that there is a magical effect that a film can have on you.
Right.
And that's not to completely dismiss. I think if a movie is glorifying some of these things and you are watching it in order to kind of partake or participate in something like that, yeah, you are using a movie as a conduit in order to do the gate opening yourself. But the movie itself really does no gate opening by its, just
right
existing.
Right. For first of all, that's not actually how that works. That's not how demons work.
Yeah, demons go through walls.
And this is something that really would extrapolate beyond, like it would extend beyond just horror movies. Like to the point that, like, even if you were for academic purposes, just for like research for school, looking into the witch craze of the early colonial period or the medieval period, or just looking into anything that has to do with witchcraft, and you pick up the Malleus Maleficarum, right, for historical research purposes, and they're like, if you read that book, it's going to like open a gateway to demons. And it's like, well, first of all, the Malleus Maleficarum is not actually a book of witchcraft. It is a book written by Christians about witchcraft.
Yeah. This is the one I hear the most for movies like Harry Potter, actually, which is not even a horror film. I mean, I guess you could argue that the last 3 or 4 movies were kind of horror.
That goes to what I said earlier. There are other movies of other genres that will pull from horror as a genre, as a latent element in the plot of the story.
Right. Because the movie wants you to feel fear for the protagonist, and sometimes the best way to make them feel that way is to...
Every story needs a villain, and the villain should be scary. You should be afraid of the villain.
The villain should represent a legitimate concern. But the Harry Potter one, the whole, like, we're talking about witchcraft, and it's like, well, we're glorifying witchcraft. You could probably make an argument for that, but the Harry Potter universe is not real witchcraft.
That's not
child witchcraft. It's not anywhere near the real actual, like, we're not playing around witchcraft stuff anymore.
It's not the same. So I've conceded this before. You could argue that it is built on the same theory.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, that's like arguing music, right? There is music theory, and there is music theory that is applicable to, different genres. I mean, that's what makes it believable. That's what makes it something that you can immerse yourself into the story with, is the fact that, yes, like it is built on a theory of magic, right? Which is something that goes into storytelling, right? There's longer discussion when it comes to levels of magic that are used in fiction, because I mean, even Tolkien and C.S. Lewis had magic in their books.
Correct. And it's really no different from the Harry Potter universe. Like, really, the only difference is Tolkien. Actually, there's really not even a difference, because Tolkien did not write his books specifically to be a Christian message.
Right.
C.S. Lewis did, but
right.
Tolkien really did not. He didn't. He in fact, he kind of didn't like Lewis's writings because of that. He was like, the message is, you're kind of putting the message before the story, and I don't like that.
Very obvious that Aslan is a Jesus lion.
Yeah, Tolkien was like, that's like not great.
Well,
you don't gotta do that.
One thing that I love about Tolkien in that aspect is exactly how complex the story is. You can't actually isolate which figure would represent Jesus in that, because there are multiple.
Yeah, because he wasn't trying to make a parallel with Christianity in his storytelling. He was just trying to tell a genuinely good story and create its own universe in a lot of ways. And he, being a Christian man, sees that some of the best way to overcome evils is with Christian values. But that's like a byproduct of, the hero villain part of the story, and how they overcome these, adversities in the face of overwhelming odds. But he doesn't try to make it parallel with the Bible.
And Peter Jackson, again, used horror tropes when filming certain parts of those movies. The Nazgul in particular, those things are terrifying.
Yeah.
Right. And the entire sequence of the first movie that includes those is terrifying. But it's for a grander point that is made later in the movie that's just epic and awesome. And the idea of good triumphing over evil is just made that much more awesome because of how terrifying this figure was initially.
Yeah, and we've got some counter objections too. At the towards the end of the episode, we're going to talk about how horror, in a lot of ways, can be very, very good, and that's kind of one of them. Or where, and we'll get more into it later. But yeah, we're talking about something that's legitimately terrifying and overcoming overwhelming odds in the face of that kind of terrifying evil, and that can be a really, really good thing. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that later.
Right.
The next one I want to hit is the fear versus faith objection. The 2 Timothy 1:7. Basically, where is it? I have it on my notes. That these films promote fear, right? Contradicting the Christian call for peace and faith. Seeing fear-driven entertainment as undermining the faith. So it's faith versus fear. They're sort of seeing the two as being against each other rather than in tandem with each other. And so that's the objection.
Right. That's an interesting one to me, because I've heard that said a lot, right? Well, the Bible says fear not. And I'm like, well, it also says to fear him who can destroy body and soul in hell. So, fear is a faculty that God gave us. Mm-hmm. Me and my brothers were talking about this the other day. That fear is a faculty that God gave us. It's a survival instinct. It is intended to prepare you to survive whatever it is that has become a threat to you. And some of it is primal. Some of it's very primal. To the point that, like, we don't understand how babies know that they are supposed to be afraid of spiders, but they are.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's very primal. Something in the monkey brain, is telling them that this is a dangerous thing. It's the same thing for snakes, right?
It's a nefesh thing, for sure.
Right. It's part of your animal instinct that is primed for survival. The reason this got brought up, though, is because, typically it's we think about these primal fears, and sometimes we're not really isolating the object of the fear correctly, right? And so there's the one joke that people have said, it's like, it's not that you're afraid of being alone in the dark, you're afraid of not being alone in the dark.
Yeah.
But so there are certain, for the primal fears, there are certain characteristics, certain traits, it's physical things that we see that alert us to the fact that this thing is dangerous. And another fear that human beings have that seems to be equally as primal, though without an explanation, is the uncanny valley. Right? Mm-hmm. The fear of things that look human but aren't. And it's not specifically that they look human and aren't human that makes you afraid of them. Generally, those who have actually described it, it's that it is trying to appear human. It is being deceptive in trying to appear human.
Right.
And it is not. And that's what makes them afraid. And so this is where you get into stuff like Skinwalker and stuff like that that people are afraid of.
Yeah. Now, this objection is to say that these two things can't work together. And my objection is, why not? Why can't they work together? Right. I think facing your fears as a disciplined human being is probably one of the most spiritual things you could possibly do.
It's a product of faith. It is a product of faith to face your fears, but that means acknowledging that you're afraid of it.
Right. And you kind of have to look it in the eye, really. You do have to. The only way to get better at it is to practice. And that's true with any profession or any, the viewers know that I was a Marine 8 years, and the way that you practice for, not freezing up in combat is to experience as much of it as you could possibly do without actually being there. Because once you get there, it's a completely different story. But we try to get you to that point to face the fear of being shot at and understanding what that feels like and learning to overcome it, so that when you do find yourself in that situation, it's not the first time you felt that way, and you have a much better reaction. You can be a lot more proactive in that situation rather than either freeze or be completely reactive. And that's usually how things go south really quickly. So there is an element where it's not faith versus fear. It's really faith and fear working together in tandem. is my counter objection to that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Like I said, for me, learning to face your fear is a product of faith, right? It's that whole idea that brave men who have courage, are not men who don't experience fear. All right, they're men who acknowledge and admit that they are 100% afraid, but they're going to stare it in the face anyway because it's necessary.
Right. So not the best objection, but it is one I hear. I think it's an easy one to address. We got a couple more. This one's probably more a legitimate concern that I've heard, and it's desensitization to sin. Sort of the overexposure objection. I couldn't find a Bible verse necessarily connected with this objection, really, outside of, you should be more like, I can't even think of the word for it, appalled at the idea of sin and darkness. And these movies desensitize your sensitivities to that. And so you're less appalled and shocked, and you should still have that, like, sin is bad feeling. And this kind of gets rid of it with overexposure. And that's the objection that I hear. And I think there's some concern about that.
That I would acknowledge as a legitimate concern, but I would say that is a case-by-case thing, and this is another one of those that is applicable beyond horror. This is applicable to, again, rom-coms. Actually, and the reason that I keep going back to rom-coms is because, look, it's one thing to show a couple of teenagers doing drugs, right before the slasher comes out to get them. It's an entire other thing to show somebody in a married couple being disloyal in their marriage, and then that actually being the object of the love story that plays out therein. Right? I would actually say that rom-coms are worse than horror because they glorify disloyalty, and they do, because that is the point,
typically speaking.
Right.
It like, even
case by case, right? Not every rom-com is that way.
No, right. But I mean, Titanic is kind of a good example. She's like engaged to somebody else, and
most famous love story in the whole world.
And the moral of that story is it's okay to be flippant and find somebody else instead if you don't want to, and that's not a great moral.
Right.
James Cameron did one really good thing about that movie, and that recreation of the sinking, I think, is seared forever in the memory of the people who've seen that movie, and in a lot of ways that did a lot of good for the Titanic itself, but the rest of the movie is not great.
Right. You could have literally put any other plot in the movie, because the sinking was the central point, and that wouldn't, no plot that you put in the movie would have changed how impactful that part of the movie was.
Right. Yeah. It was kind of a useless plot point, and not a great one either. It doesn't have the right moral to the story, I think.
Right.
And that could be argued one way or another. But again, this is a case by case thing. And
I would say this is one of those areas where, like, yes, like the schlocky 90s slasher horror movies. Yep. Great example. Right. Great example. I really don't appreciate those very much, because, like, that's really all they are. And it's almost cookie cutter. The most meta thing that was ever done with it was Scream, because Scream was self-conscious about how cookie cutter that genre had gotten. Right. And so they did this whole meta thing where they played with how cookie cutter the genre was.
It was a self-aware horror film.
Right. And that made it almost a comedy in certain parts. But, like that's the thing, is those, they're glorifying a lifestyle and culture that isn't kosher. Right. And it isn't, and they're unrealistic with the fact that, like, I mean, how many times do you shoot this guy and he's still chasing you? Like,
yeah. And then we have, of course, a counter objection, I think, to this kind of stuff is, with the desensitization specifically, is you just because you're Christian or believer, Jewish, what have you, that doesn't mean that you should live in a bubble in such a way that you cannot handle a real life example of something like this were it to come up, because you've never exposed. And I think we've talked about this before on an episode prior, about desensitization, and where I argued that I think it's kind of a good thing. Like, you shouldn't practice sin or anything, but to get used to it in a certain way, where if you're ever confronted with somebody who is doing drugs, right, and that's an ugly thing, if you're not ready to handle that, it could, it could be very dangerous for you. It could shake you to your core, and it's just, you lived too much in such a bubble that you became useless when the time came for you to act.
I've got a real life example of this personally, just because, like, I in my young days had attended a church that was one of those that treated the Mary Jane as though it was equal to heroin, and that was the mentality that I had going into the real world, working my first part-time job at 16 years old, only to find out that actually every single person that I worked with took part in that substance, right? That actually it at the time, and even now, is as common, if not more common, than smoking cigarettes.
Yeah.
Right. And I realized very quickly that how I approached that, even if I didn't agree with it, how I approached it, due to the sensitivity that I had to the idea, that I needed to readjust that if I was going to be able to function in society with the rest of everyone else. Right. You can have your sensitivities to it, but if you can't actually function in society because you are so sensitive to it, we call that sheltering. Right, you've been over sheltered to the point that you actually can't function in society, because you have such an aversion to this thing that actually, in the world, I get the world is a fallen world, but in the world, this is normal.
Right. And if you can't handle that, you will come off and be weak. And that's being a strong person in the face of stuff like that is what will be a better witness to your faith than anything else, than anything that you could possibly say, gospel wise, which kind of leads me into the next point, the final objection. I just want to touch it real quick and then go into our counter objections. But non-faith focus, the idea that you shouldn't consume any content that isn't faith-based focus. And this comes from the Colossians 3:2 objection, that you shouldn't, Harry Potter's not written by a Christian, it's not Christian, so you should not read anything that's not Christian, kind of
Actually,
stuff.
she did claim to be a Christian back then when she was
first. But that's the objection here.
So not a good objection, because the same people who are spouting that are they want to be watching the race this Sunday. They want to be watching the Super Bowl. They want it, right? There's a whole lot of faith-based content that they're going to be consuming.
And to be fair, there is a lot of non-faith-based content that is benign in a certain way. Like racing is not, it's not good or bad. It's just racing. And so the idea is, well, this is the bad stuff, so you shouldn't, put any focus on this. I mean,
I would hard disagree. I would say that anybody who thinks this has clearly never seen the Conjuring movies, because those movies are I wouldn't say entirely faith-based, but faith is a central point in those movies, right?
Yeah.
And it is Christianity that wins out at the end of those.
Yeah, and so that brings us to some of our counter objections now. So I think going back to this non-faith focus, this is really a matter of perspective. And I'm looking at my notes now, and I really could have put this in a different order, but the exploration of moral and spiritual themes. So this kind of goes hand in hand with this other point that I wrote, and it's the opportunity for discernment. I think they're kind of the same thing now.
Yes.
Non-faith-based is a matter of a perspective issue. I think you can watch any non-faith-based movie from a faith perspective and use that as an opportunity for critical thinking in your own life and in your own walk of faith. That would be a positive, mental exercise or building in your own walk of life. Just about any movie, except for obviously, sexually explicit, and that's all that it is, rhymes with, mourn.
Right.
You know, the obvious, right? The obvious, but basically any, like, Saving Private Ryan can be a faith-based movie if you make it one. And I would argue that it kind of clearly is, but yeah.
Well, yes. I mean, because actually the message to that movie is the same one that should be applicable to every believer who
Right.
accepts the sacrifice of Yeshua, right? What does Tom Hanks tell him as he's dying? Earn this.
Yeah.
Earn this, right? I and 7 other men have lost our lives in the process of trying to make sure you get the opportunity to go back home and live. So you better live a good life.
Yeah. Yeah. I like the sniper. I think one of the best parts of that movie is just how calm the sniper is in the face of everything, and it's because he's a man of faith, and that's super obvious. That's like a plot point, really. So yeah, there's like an argument there where one of the morals you should pick up from that story is that the one person who is the most in control of himself is the one guy who is the most obvious about his faith. That's a great lesson there.
Yep.
The Conjuring movies, you can have the similar, come away from that. And I love the Conjuring movies personally. Those are my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, well, they're because those specifically are in almost every case. It's this great example of good triumphing over evil, right? The fright factor of the reality of demons, right? Which is that's a real thing. You shouldn't you shouldn't feel that it's wrong to watch movies about demons because, like, that, first of all, that's a reality that people do deal with.
Right.
It may be rare, maybe sparingly, but it is a reality, and we see that even in Scripture. And again, like I said with the Nazgul and Lord of the Rings, the fact that they are built up to be so scary is what makes it all the more awesome when good triumphs over it.
And I think it particularly makes it more realistic. I think, and I've met purely, and I won't say who, but there's somebody in my life close who really genuinely believes that they are 100% completely protected from any and all spiritual attacks, possessions, things like this, because they believe in the Holy Spirit. And I know that that's a very common thing for Christians to think, but you got to understand, biblically speaking, many of the people that Jesus healed from exorcisms were themselves believers. So simply being a believer is not protection enough. So I think there's a lot of good in horror films in kind of giving you a harsh reality check that, you can't just think, oh, I got the Holy Spirit, so I'm good. Like, I don't have to worry about this. There should be a legitimate fear when it comes to some of this stuff. And that should act as a kind of deterrent too. And the movies help you feel the gravity of that. The exploring the moral and spiritual themes can, we're talking about dealing with the human condition, good versus evil. And usually in these horror movies, usually good prevails, which is another like positive thing. It all comes down to perspective. A lot of these, you can turn them into a spiritual lesson, because the movie itself has a good outcome.
Right.
Typically.
What did I say earlier? I said, yeah, it's one thing to discern good from evil when everything is all good, right? Which is it's essentially the dynamic that people who oppose horror movies would have you live in, right? It's another thing to discern good from evil when everything is actually bad.
Yes, and I think a horror movie can help you do that. And in a which brings me to one of the other points, it can help you do that in a safe and controlled way. It can help you overcome these fears by feeling fear in a controlled environment where you don't actually have anything to fear. It's a movie. And so that's one of the point, the confronting fear and giving hope. I wrote that down as a bullet point specifically, where
absolutely,
you're providing an ultimately a sort of safe space. I hate to use like that, that kind of term, but that's what you're kind of doing. You're in a controlled environment where you can you can face this in a way that's not actually going to be a detriment to your life.
Right.
And then work on critical thinking from there and use whatever lessons, you know, that either the artist wants you to get glean from that, or whatever the artist is trying to get you to think. What are you really thinking? What's the counter to that?
Well, and I think going back to the discerning, the opportunity for discernment.
Yeah.
This is in particular where I love the fact that so many horror movies actually are either a social critique or a cautionary tale.
Mhm.
And those two actually end up being the same thing many times more often than not, because a lot of what it is in terms of social critique is actually critiquing aspects about the human condition, right? And that's that's where you kind of have to be able to see past the fear in order to get it. Somebody compared horror movies to spicy food. They're like, at a certain point, you've watched so many that you actually don't even get afraid of them. That like they don't scare you anymore, and so you can enjoy the
Yeah.
actual story being told.
That's where I'm at.
Yeah, right. That's where I'm at with them. It's been a long time since I've seen a movie that actually genuinely scared me. The last one that like was genuinely frightening to me, I would say, was As Above, So Below.
That's a super good one.
Which was a really good movie.
The
But
Heretic for me, actually.
I still need to see that one. That's on my list.
It's not like the same as Above, So Below frightening, where you feel claustrophobic, right? Which was excellently executed. Heretic plays with what you thought you understood. It's so good. And I remember thinking, I actually don't know what's going on now, and that kind of scares me. Like I thought I had a grasp.
Logical horror.
Huh? Yeah.
Like,
and it's Christian. It's about Mormons.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, yeah, the name Heretic. But things like, and I remember you and me talking about this. Believe it or not, some of you who are younger may not realize this. Those of you who are older will probably understand this when I say it. The first Jurassic Park movie was actually marketed as a horror movie, and it was received as a horror movie.
It's a monster movie.
It's a monster movie, right? The T-Rex is scary. The main selling point of the fear was the Velociraptors, though.
Yeah.
And again, because those were executed in horror movie fashion, right? The cinematography that went behind that. But the first movie in particular, and really the whole series, plays on this same theme, but the first movie really hammered it in, so much so they actually even had a character in the movie to point this out in case the execution of the social critique wasn't on the nose enough. They wrote a character in the movie to make this point. It is a social critique on human hubris. Yeah. Right? The idea that a man can achieve things that only God should be able to do.
Yeah.
Right? The let us make a name for ourselves. Let us build a tower to heaven.
Yeah. Now, if you watch a horror movie from a believer's perspective with critical thinking skills, you will see the parallels with movies like that, with the Tower of Babel and things like that. These movies have so much more to offer if you just let them.
Right.
And so I was going to bring up Jurassic Park if you didn't, because I was going to talk about exactly Goldblum's character. We were so concerned with whether or not we didn't stop to think of whether or not we should.
Right.
Cautionary tales. It's a great line. It's iconic.
Yep. It's and it's amazing actually how that is the case a lot for monster movies in particular. Monster movies are the social critique, what the monster itself actually is usually something that's actually a little bit more abstract than like the physical. It's what the monster is a physical manifestation that somebody thought of what this abstract idea is that they're afraid of. Right. So we have stuff like that today, like the newer movies. Megan, I think, is one. I've not seen that, but that's a social critique on AI and the dangers of AI.
Mm-hmm. Or like, I think Her. I haven't seen that one either, but
yeah. There's a few. I'm not interested in those because there's a heavy feminist aspect to it. But what was that?
Black Mirror.
Oh yeah.
Those are all cautionary tales, really.
Yep.
Kind of masquerading as a horror, sort of. But to your point, these are, in a way, they're trying to be reflections of reality,
right?
In some kind of way, there's a deeper message there. And that's a good thing,
Right.
mirroring real world struggles, real fears, real things that could possibly happen. Um, a reflection of even just the spiritual reality of battling with of spiritual warfare. These movies are reflections of that, and that's a good thing. Being more grounded in reality as a result of a movie like this.
Right. And for those of you who don't know, like the oldest, I mentioned Godzilla earlier, right? Godzilla is like one of the most classic horror movies. Seamus, tell us what that's a social critique on.
I'm sorry, say again. I was reading
Godzilla?
Oh, Godzilla?
Yeah, what's that a social critique on?
I don't know. The
This
new one?
oh, you don't know this man, this is like this is one of the most like widely known facts about. It's a social critique on nuclear energy.
Energy, like nuclear power?
Yes,
Not
because we first of all, that's how he was made, right? That's how Godzilla was made. Was it's a reaction to exposure to nuclear materials in a iguana, I think, is the actual storyline there. But we hate Godzilla when he's destroying the city, right? But then when something else that's worse than Godzilla is destroying the city, we want Godzilla to come back. Right? There's this love-hate relationship that you have with it where it's like it does damage, but it also saves us. And it's a social critique on nuclear energy.
So I learned a thing just now. I did not know that. I knew that Godzilla was a horror film, but I didn't realize like really what. I guess that makes sense though, because it's all based on nuclear stuff.
Yep.
More or less. But I mean, there's a lot of our superhero movies were born in a time where nuclear energy was not understood.
Right.
And so they are all playing on the fear of not understanding what nuclear really does. And so, the nuclear spider that bites Peter Parker and, like a lot of superhero movies come from a sort of social fear
Yes.
and then creating a hero out of that.
Yep. And a lot of, one of the big things, the most successful horror movies use this trope, and it's this idea that like what you don't see is actually what's scaring you. For monster movies in particular, and this has been a pretty hard, fast rule in the directors community of monster movies, time out of mind, is that the movie instantly stops being scary the moment that you show the monster. So if you want to successfully have a scary monster movie, you do have to avoid showing the monster for as long as humanly possible.
Yeah. Makes it more effective in the fear aspect.
Right. Well, and it's playing on that fear because the unknown is really what we're afraid of, right? That's the whole, that actually is the primary thing behind the fear of the paranormal, right? The fear of demons and stuff is the fact that you can't see them. But this plays into, right, the fear of the Nachash, right? The fear of the serpent, the fear of the beast, as it were, right? These are things that we don't see, and it's almost like a primal reaction to a higher revelation that humans have always had, right? That there is a darkness in us that is capable of great and terrible things. And because we know that about ourselves, we know that about our fellow man. And this is why we're afraid of other people. And we're afraid of the potential of other people. And we're afraid of the potential of ourselves. And how awful we could become.
And it might be uncomfortable, but dealing with it is better than ignoring it.
Right. Well, simply acknowledging it and knowing it.
Yeah. So we're about 4 minutes over the hour, but we started late.
About right at time.
Yeah, we're doing just fine. It's been a while since we've been on the show anyway, so we got a lot to make up for. Anyway, so we're gonna do a whole nother hour. So everybody stand by. Don't go anywhere. I'm kidding.
No. I think, my answer to the question is horror kosher. The answer is it depends. I would say as a majority, the answer is no. I would really say there is really only one type of horror movie that is absolutely unkosher, and that's the ones that we just described, which had their heyday in the 80s and 90s. Now they're making a comeback because we're remaking everything now. Yeah. The I Know What You Did Last Summer remake, I think that there's been like record numbers reported of people engaging in horrible behavior in movie theaters, which is a phenomenon we've not seen since those movies were first released in theaters.
Yeah.
So again, it's one of those where it's like, all right, the behavior that those movies manifests is clearly not kosher. So those are not kosher. But like nobody's doing satanic rituals in the middle of a Conjuring movie.
Yeah, the Conjuring films particularly are pretty Christian based, and so they're trying to have a message of hope in the end. Usually, the Nun, actually, the most recent Nun didn't really quite have that. But
very quickly, I forgot to mention this. Look, there has been Christian horror since I was a child.
Yeah,
there has been Christian horror. Frank Peretti and Ted Decker are two very renowned horror authors that write Christian horror. There are movies of their works. They're generally B-rated and they're terrible.
That's not the author's fault.
Right. That's just the execution. But for as a kid at the time when I was watching them, they were scary. But they've got they've got a good Christian point at the end of it. There's a lot of confrontation of your own sin kind of thing.
I like the Screw Tape Letters by C.S. Lewis is technically horror, and I think that's a fantastic piece of literature. I don't actually generally don't like C.S. Lewis usually, but the Screw Tape Letters are something else.
I loved the Screw Tape Letters.
Yeah. So there's a lot there. Is it? Yeah, it depends. All the stuff that's only meant to glorify violence and has no story otherwise. No. Sexual content explicitly, and that's really all it's doing. No. Use discernment. It's a case-by-case thing, but don't just write off all horrors as being not good for the believer. I think in some cases it's the opposite is true, that it's a better opportunity for you to face and have that discussion of your own faith and your own strength in your own faith in a much more controlled environment, so you'd be better prepared for the real world.
I think one final point too is just that the Bible has horror in it. It plainly does. Okay. First of all, if somebody were to accurately make a film adaptation of the Book of Revelation, that movie would be terrifying.
Yeah.
First of all, and any of the prophets who are giving warnings to Israel, if you were to actually dramatize the prophecies that they give of these terrible things that would happen to Israel if they don't fall in line, if they don't repent, that would be a horror movie. Those would be horror movies. There's plenty of them. And actually there's a new movie pioneering that style of horror that's going to be coming out. It is going to be a horror movie based out of the Gospels called The Carpenter's Son. Nicolas Cage is going to be featured in it. This has mixed feelings, right? Because a lot of people think, well, this is sacrilegious trying to make a horror movie out of Jesus's life. It's like, look, Jesus encountered demons. Jesus encountered demoniacs. Jesus experienced and, being tempted by Satan himself. Even Mel Gibson in The Passion of the Christ played on horror tropes and themes when exhibiting, those aspects. So I don't think it's inherently sacrilegious. I don't think it's inherently bad. I do plan on watching the movie. Just because I think the concept is interesting, and I like Nicolas Cage as an actor.
It sounds like I'd want to check pure curiosity, but it sounds like it has great potential.
Right. It's either going to be great or it's going to bomb, because Nicolas Cage can only do one of those two.
What is the Possession? Is a horror film, and it's a
Jewish exorcism.
And it's fantastic, and it's a neat exploration of an idea that's not been explored in cinema, until it came out. I like exorcism movies a lot, actually. I like pointing out the inaccuracies. I'm like, nope, it's supposed to be Psalm 91.
Right, yeah. Where was the sulfur incense?
Yeah. Did you even read the Key of Solomon? What are you doing here?
Oh man, yeah, great stuff. So yeah, I mean, like I think that, to the idea that the Bible is just this, sunshine and rainbows book that has all the answers for your life, in the
Oh,
positive, Captain America Boy Scout style. It's just not a realistic look at the world or the Bible or life. Right. The Bible has elements of it that if we really, really think about the reality of those, it's terrifying. It's scary. And it's something that we actually should think of in those terms.
it's meant to be a raw book. It's as much as we over spiritualize it, and I don't mean to say over spiritualize like that's a bad thing, but it is a raw book. The Masorites had to come up with the Karei Ketiv traditions for when reading the Torah out loud in a synagogue. There are certain parts you can't say them in polite company, and so they had to write in the margins like, "Hey, don't say this word because there are women in the synagogue, and like that's completely inappropriate." But it's in the scripture, so they left it there. But they have a marginal note that says, "Don't say it. Say something else. Say this instead." And that's the Karei Ketiv tradition, because it's a very raw book in a lot of ways. So
yes,
yeah,
yes. So, sometimes that's funny.
Sometimes it can be funny. Sometimes you're like, well, okay, thanks for that. Didn't need that.
Yeah. But all that being said, yeah, I don't think that horror movies are inherently unkosher.
It's actually my favorite genre.
Right. Right. Yeah. Especially right now, because they're just cinema's in a dark place right now. There's just not many good movies coming out. Everything is so ironic, and like you can't have a serious moment without a joke to interrupt the sincerity of it. So horror movies are the most sincere movies that are out there right now.
They actually make you face your feelings, because right now directors are so afraid of feelings that they have to break up touching moments with jokes.
Right.
And I blame Marvel started doing that, and it was funny at first, but now it's like everyone's doing it and everyone's afraid to face their feelings, and it's kind of ruining a lot of movies that otherwise had a lot of potential.
It's James Gunn's fault. Well, it's Disney's fault, not James Gunn's fault.
But yeah, so horror films are some of my favorite genres period. It's such a difficult genre to actually get right. So
it's actually become a tradition for us, right? Anytime that we've been able to get together for Sukkot, we watch the Conjuring series.
Yeah, or something within the Conjuring universe, like the Nun. Like we gotta see the new Nun now.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but yeah, so I think that's that one done and dusted, more or less.
Yep. Can't beat that dead horse anymore.
Yeah, no. And again, we're 13 minutes over even though like 10 minutes ago, we were like, all right, we're over time. Let's finish up. And then we went on for 10 more minutes.
Okay. Well, we do that.
Yeah, we do. Again, it's been
the Irish goodbye on a stream.
What?
I said, you can't just do the Irish goodbye on a stream.
I mean, I could click end stream right now. And who's going to stop me?
Well,